Nadia leaned in closer, her voice breaking from fear, and asked in a teary voice, "Are you sure we should watch this again?" James ignored her, then tapped the screen. That one click changed everything. It was just another day where their parents were too busy to supervise them closely. The videos they have been watching online changed everything in the lives of James and Nadia. What started as curiosity turned into something no one expected, and by the time their parents found out, it was already too late. The family of Jackson and the Benjamin lived close to each other in an elite neighborhood on the outskirts of the city's island. Their friendship grew stronger as they spent time together, laughing, helping each other, and making happy memories. If one family needed something, the other was always there to help. Everyone in the neighborhood wished they had a friendship like theirs. James, the Benjamin's son, was a brilliant and intelligent boy who always wanted to learn new things. Nadia, the Jacksons' daughter, was beautiful and always full of life. The children were childhood friends and were inseparable, spending almost every moment after school together, playing, exploring, and having fun as kids. With both parents always busy with work, the children spent most of their time keeping each other company, while the parent hustled out from morning till night for their daily bread. The Benjamins employed a housemaid called Cynthia to watch over the children while the parents were at work. Cynthia, in her mid-20s, was a good fit for the job at first. But outside her professional corridor was a young woman more interested in scrolling through social media and chatting with her friends than paying attention to the two energetic children under her care. One Saturday afternoon, the parents decided to buy a small smartphone for the children. "It's just for cartoons, learning apps, and if I need to hear from you while we're at work," Mr. Benjamin said as he handed the phone to James and Nadia. "Nothing else, do you hear me?" "Yes, Daddy," James replied eagerly, holding the shiny new device with so much happiness. At first, the phone was used for its initial purpose. The children laughed at their favorite animated characters and took turns playing their favorite games. The living room echoed with their laughter, and the parents were satisfied that the device was serving its purpose. But as the weeks passed, curiosity began to take hold. One evening, while Cynthia was busy on a lengthy phone call, James whispered to Nadia, "Let's see if there's something else we can watch on the phone. I'm tired of cartoons." "What else?" Nadia asked, her innocent eyes wide with interest. "I don't know. Let's just check out other videos." They began searching the internet beyond the usual cartoons. At first, it was educative videos, DIY crafts, funny animals, and children playing games. But the algorithm soon presented something different, a thumbnail with blurred figures and an intriguing title. James hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen where Cynthia was still talking. With a mixture of excitement and nervousness, he tapped the video. What they saw on the screen was confusing. The voices were quiet, the actions unfamiliar. "What are they doing?" Nadia asked, her tone both curious and unsure. "I don't know," James replied. "Let's watch more." The videos became an everyday activity. Every time Cynthia left them unattended to, James and Nadia would go into the room with the phone. Each video led to another, more intriguing than the last. Their confusion slowly turned into curiosity, and curiosity became action. One evening, James looked at Nadia and asked, "Do you want to try what they're doing?" Nadia refused and asked, "But what if Cynthia sees us?" "She's too busy on her phone," James assured her. "She won't notice." And so, they began mimicking the actions they had seen. At first, it was awkward and clumsy, more out of curiosity than anything else. But as the days passed, they became more comfortable, their activities turning into an unfamiliar game. As weeks went by, the change in their behavior wasn't really noticeable at first. Nadia, usually lively and talkative, became more withdrawn, often staring into space during meals. James, once eager to join his friends for football games after school, began making excuses to stay indoors. "Are you feeling okay?" Mrs. Benjamin asked James one evening as he sat quietly at the dinner table. "I'm fine, Mom," he replied quickly, avoiding her gaze. The parents noticed these shifts of emotions in them, but wrote them off as typical childhood behaviours. "They're probably just tired from school," Mrs. Jackson said one evening during a phone call with her friend. But beneath the surface, something much darker was growing. Cynthia, unaware to the changes, continued to neglect her duties. Her eyes were always glued to her phone as their unacceptable world deepened. Weeks turned into months, and James and Nadia continued their unacceptable acts and had created unspoken rules about their activities. No talking about it, no letting anyone find out, and always erasing their search history. One evening, as James sat on the floor of his room with the phone in hand, Nadia asked, "Do you think this is good at all for us?" James paused, the glow of the screen illuminating his face. "It's good if no one knows," he said confidently. That assurance was enough for Nadia, and their pact of secrecy grew stronger. But the consequences of their actions began to show in other ways. At school, James started displaying an unusual boldness, speaking to his classmates with a newfound self-confidence. Nadia, on the other hand, avoided her friends, spending her breaks alone or with James. The Jacksons and the Benjamins remained unaware, too caught up in their work schedules to notice the subtle cracks forming in their son and daughter's innocence. But trouble was developing. The smartphone, once a source of happiness and ease, had turned into a gateway to something much darker. Behind their laughter, a secret was building, one that would soon unfold in unexpected ways. Each time Cynthia left them unattended, they hid together in James's room, searching for more unacceptable content and rehearsing what they watched online. At school, James began to change. During lunch breaks, he started whispering to a select few friends, sharing snippets of what he and Nadia had been watching. His friends' reactions ranged from shock to curiosity, but James's growing influence was undeniable. One afternoon, during a break in class, James leaned over to his friend Jide. "I can show you something you've never seen before," he said with a sly grin. "What is it?" Jide asked, intrigued. "You'll see. Meet me after school," James replied. That evening, in a quiet corner of the playground, James brought out the phone. He navigated to one of the saved videos and pressed play. Jide's eyes widened as he watched, his curiosity quickly turning into fascination. Soon, James's circle of influence expanded. He began sharing the content with other friends in the neighborhood and even a few classmates, turning their after-school hangouts into sessions to watch more unacceptable videos online. Meanwhile, Nadia grew more withdrawn. She no longer played with her friends during recess, preferring to sit alone or with James. At home, her parents noticed her sudden quietness from their daughter that was always active and playful, but attributed it to exhaustion from school. "She's probably just growing up," Mrs. Jackson said one evening as she cleared the dinner table. In the neighborhood, whispers began to circulate. Parents started noticing changes in their own children, an unusual boldness in some and a troubling shyness in others. One mother overheard her son using words and phrases he couldn't possibly have learned at home. "Where did you hear that?" she demanded, but the boy refused to answer. James, feeling invincible, continued to spread his influence. He began organizing meetings in the backyard of his house, where he showed the videos to a growing group of friends. These sessions were accompanied by whispered instructions as James showed them things he had seen online. One evening, while Cynthia was concentrating on a long phone call, James and Nadia invited two friends, Say and Tolu, into the house. "You have to promise not to tell anyone," James said, his tone serious. "We won't," Say replied eagerly, his eyes darting toward the phone. The four of them crowded around the screen, their whispers barely audible over the faint sound of the video. Nadia shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent, too afraid to voice out. At home, the Jacksons and Benjamins remained unaware of what was happening. Their busy schedules left little time for meaningful interaction with their children. Cynthia's negligence only added to the problem as she continued to prioritize her social life over her responsibilities. One day, during a quiet afternoon, Nadia sat alone in her room. She stared at the phone, her small hands trembling. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thought about what she and James had been doing. For the first time, guilt began to creep in. "Maybe this is wrong," she whispered to herself. Her moment of doubt was interrupted by James, who burst into the room with a mischievous grin. "Come on, everyone's waiting," he said, grabbing her hand. "I don't think we should do this anymore," Nadia replied, her voice barely audible. James frowned. "Don't be silly. It's just a game. No one's getting hurt." Reluctantly, Nadia followed him to the backyard where a group of friends awaited their leader. They began as usual with James taking charge and the others anxiously following his instructions. But as the activities grew more reckless, the tension in the air became almost obvious. Unbeknownst to the James and his friends, a watchful eye had been observing them. Mrs. Judith, a neighbour known for always being everywhere, had grown suspicious of James's frequent gatherings. That evening, as she watched from her kitchen window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. They huddled together in the backyard, were engaged in actions far beyond imaginations. Mrs. Judith quickly grabbed her phone and began recording, her hands trembling as she captured the shocking scene. "This has to stop," she said to herself, her heart pounding. As their usual misguided actions ended and they left, Mrs. Judith stood frozen in her kitchen. The video she had just recorded was undeniable evidence of what had been happening. Should she confront the parents directly, or should she take the evidence to the authorities? In one household down the street, Mrs. Johnson had been particularly worried about her daughter, Chisholm. Normally a cheerful and active child, Chisholm now looked uncomfortable for days and avoided sitting for long periods. Concerned, Mrs. Johnson confronted her one evening after dinner. "Chisholm, you've been walking funny these days," she said gently. "Did something happen at school?" Chisholm shifted uncomfortably. "I fell during playtime," she mumbled, her eyes fixed on the floor. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't convinced. Her maternal instincts told her there was more to the story. The next day, she decided to take Chisholm to the hospital. As they sat in the waiting room, Mrs. Johnson prayed silently that the issue was something minor. After the doctor's examination, he returned with a serious expression. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter has some discomfort," he explained with concern. "It's consistent with engaging in unsafe behaviour. Has she mentioned anything unusual to you?" Mrs. Johnson felt her heart drop. "Unsafe behaviour? What do you mean?" "Chisholm, what is he talking about?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Chisholm's lips shivered as tears streamed down her face. "It wasn't my idea," she whispered. "James showed me. He said it was just fun." The room went into silence as Mrs. Johnson tried to process her daughter's confession. "James? From the Benjamins family?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Chisholm nodded, burying her face in her hands. Fueled by a mix of anger and heartbreak, Mrs. Johnson stormed out of the hospital with Chisholm. She marched straight to the Benjamins' house. Mrs. Benjamin opened the door with a warm smile that quickly faded when she saw the rage in Mrs. Johnson's eyes. "What's the matter?" she asked hesitantly. "Your son," Mrs. Johnson spat, pointing an accusatory finger. "James has been teaching my daughter inappropriate things. He's shown her the wrong things, and God knows how many other people in the estate." Mrs. Benjamin's face hardened. "Excuse me? How dare you accuse my son of such nonsense?" she shot back. Mrs. Johnson held nothing back. "My daughter just came from the hospital. She confessed everything. Your son is leading his friends into doing the wrong things and making them do things they don't understand." "Get off my property," Mrs. Benjamin shouted. "James would never do such a thing. Maybe you should look at your own parenting before blaming my son." As the argument escalated, Mr. Benjamin joined his wife at the door. He ordered their security guard to escort Mrs. Johnson out. Adding insult to injury, Mrs. Benjamin grabbed a bowl of water from the kitchen and splashed it at Mrs. Johnson. "Get out, and don't you dare bring your lies here again," she yelled. Humiliated and furious, Mrs. Johnson left, vowing not to let the matter rest. Meanwhile, James, overhearing the commotion, felt an increase in his pride. His parents' fierce defense of him only added to his belief that nobody would find out. That evening, he told Nadia and his other friends, "See, nobody can touch us. They'll never believe anyone." The following days saw James doubling down on his behaviour. He gathered more of his friends into his circle, continuing to share the videos and encourage them to recreate what they watched. His confidence grew, but so did the risks he was taking. Unbeknownst to him, Mrs. Judith had not been idle since capturing the shocking footage in her backyard. The more she replayed the video, the angrier she became. Deciding it was time to take action, she made her way to the local police station. At the station, she explained everything to the officer on duty, handing over her phone as evidence. The officer watched the video in silence. His jaw dropped as the scene unfolded. When it ended, he looked up at Mrs. Judith. "Thank you for bringing this to us. We'll begin an investigation immediately." Within hours, spy officers began discreetly interviewing parents in the neighbourhood. Stories started to emerge, each more troubling than the last. James's actions and the consequences began to take shape. One afternoon, as the sun dipped, Mrs. Judith noticed James and his group of friends sneaking into the backyard. From her point, she saw them doing the same thing, their laughter hushed and worrying. Grabbing her phone, she began recording once again. This time, she captured not just their inappropriate actions, but also their conversations. "Make sure everything stays between us," James said, his tone firm. "If anyone finds out, the result might be a trouble for us." They nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of fear and trust in their self-proclaimed leader. As the session continued, Mrs. Judith's anger boiled over. She had seen enough. Without waiting for the next day, she marched straight to the police station with her new evidence. At the station, the officers reviewed the footage with angry expressions. One of them, Inspector Kelvin, leaned back in his chair and sighed. "This is worse than we thought," he said. "We need to act quickly before more people are affected." The police decided to conduct a raid the following day. They wanted to ensure that no stone was left unturned and that the culprits, James, his friends involved, and the negligent parents, would face justice. That evening, plainclothes officers visited the homes of some of the people who had been identified in the video. They spoke to the parents, revealing just enough to measure their reactions. The responses ranged from denial to shock, with some parents breaking down in tears as they learned the extent of what had been happening. At the Benjamin household, life carried on as usual. Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin were preparing for the next day's work, completely unaware of the storm headed their way. James sat in his room, scrolling through the phone, planning the next gathering. Nadia, however, seemed distant. She sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with guilt and fear. She had tried to voice her concerns to James, but he had brushed her off with the same confident assurance. No one can touch us. The next morning, the police arrived. 3 marked vans pulled up outside the Benjamins' residence, their sirens silent, but their presence unmistakable. Neighbours peeped from their windows, murmuring in confusion and curiosity. Officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they approached the gate. A security guard tried to intervene but was quickly dismissed. Mrs. Benjamin, hearing the commotion, opened the door with a look of confusion. "What's going on?" she asked. "Ma'am, we have a warrant to search your premises and to invite you, your husband, housemaid and son for questioning," Inspector Kelvin said, holding up the document. "My son? What for?" she demanded, her voice rising in panic. After so much back and forth, she surrendered, and the officers were allowed into the house. James, hearing the commotion, tried to hide the phone, but it was too late. An officer found it under his bed, the screen showing a paused video. "James Benjamin, you're coming with us," another officer said, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. The boy's bravery vanished in an instant. His face turned pale as he stammered. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You'll have a chance to explain that," the officer replied, leading him out of the house. Mrs. Benjamin screamed, "You can't take my son. He's just a young boy." She turned to her husband, who had just arrived home from work. "Do something." But Mr. Benjamin stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. "What is all this about?" he finally managed to ask. Inspector Kelvin handed him a copy of the warrant and said, "This is about negligence, sir. Your son has been leading his friends into activities that nobody should ever be exposed to, and you, as his parents, have failed to supervise him." As the authorities were taking James and his family in for questioning, other officers approached the Jacksons' home. Nadia's parents were equally shocked when their daughter's name was mentioned. Mrs. Jackson broke down in tears, holding Nadia tightly as officers explained the situation. "I had no idea," she sobbed. "She's just a little girl." "And that's exactly why this happened," Inspector Kelvin said gently. "Children this age need supervision. Without it, things like this can spiral out of control." James, sitting with regrets in the police van, for the first time realized the gravity of his actions. But it was too late. The evidence was very strong, and the consequences were unavoidable. The courtroom was packed to capacity, the air heavy with anticipation. The scandal had sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, and people were anxiously waiting to witness the proceedings. James and his parents sat at the defendant's table, their faces pale with a mix of guilt and disbelief. The prosecutor began the trial with evidence, the videos from Mrs. Judith, the testimonies from parents, and even statements from some of those involved. It was a grim picture painted with precision, leaving little room for doubt. "This case is not just about one boy," the prosecutor said, addressing the court. "It's about the failure of a community to protect its children. Neglect, carelessness, and a lack of supervision created a breeding ground for this tragedy." James's defense attorney argued for leniency, emphasizing his age and the environment that had failed to guide him. "James is a product of circumstances," he argued. He is a child who needs guidance, not punishment. The judge listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When it was time for James's parents to speak, their voices trembled with regret. "We failed our son," Mr. Benjamin admitted, his voice cracking. "We were too focused on our work and didn't see what was happening right in front of us." Mrs. Benjamin's tears flowed freely as she added, "We thought we were doing enough by providing for him, but we were wrong. We're sorry for the pain our negligence has caused." The testimonies of other parents were equally heartbreaking. Mrs. Johnson recounted the moment she learned about her daughter's involvement. "I trusted the people around me," she said. "I never imagined something like this could happen." After hours of deliberation, the judge delivered his verdict. James was ordered to undergo mandatory psychological counselling, focusing on understanding boundaries and the consequences of his actions. His parents were sentenced to 1 year in prison for negligence, a decision that sparked murmurs throughout the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, their cameras flashing as families left the building. The Benjamins family's downfall had become a cautionary tale for the entire community, a huge reminder of the dangers of neglecting children's supervision. In the weeks that followed, the neighbourhood began its slow journey toward healing. Workshops were organised to educate parents about the importance of monitoring their children's activities, both online and offline. Counsellors were brought into schools to work with those affected, helping them process their experiences and move forward. James's sessions with the psychologist were challenging but transformative. At first, he was resistant, refusing to open up about his actions. But over time, the layers of guilt and confusion began to peel away. "I didn't know it was wrong," he admitted during one session. "It just felt like a game." "Games have rules," the psychologist said gently. "And some rules are there to protect us and others. Now you know better, and you can choose to do better." Nadia also began her journey toward recovery. Her parents, now more attentive than ever, enrolled her in a support group for young girls. The experience helped her regain her confidence and rebuild her sense of self-worth. One sunny afternoon, a community meeting was held at the local park. Parents, children, and teachers gathered to discuss ways to prevent such incidents from happening again. Mrs. Judith was honoured for her bravery in bringing the issue to light, and Mrs. Johnson shared her story as a lesson for others. "We're not just here to point fingers," she said. "We're here to take responsibility and make things right for our children." As the meeting ended, James stood up and addressed the crowd. His voice was small but steady. "I'm sorry for what I did," he said. "I didn't understand how much damage I was causing. I want to do better." The crowd responded with a mixture of applause and encouragement. For the first time in months, James felt a glimmer of hope. James, though marked by his mistakes, starts working with his psychologist to create a program teaching other children about safe and responsible behaviour. One evening, James and Nadia sit under a tree, their friendship now redefined by mutual understanding and a promise to make better choices. The sun sets over the neighbourhood, casting a warm glow that speaks of hope, redemption, and the power of learning from the past. This story is a wake-up call for all parents. Online safety is more important than ever, and it's up to us to ensure our children have the right guidance. Set parental controls, check their activity, and most importantly, talk to them about the dangers of the internet. Because sometimes, curiosity can lead to consequences nobody should ever face. This experience became a wake-up call for every parent in the community. Stronger parental controls, more open discussions and increased supervision ensured that nobody would go down the same path. James and Nadia, though forever changed by their mistakes, slowly rebuilt their confidence with the right support. In the end, this wasn't just a story of loss, it was a story of learning and redemption.